مشکلات معلمین در افغانستان بسیار زیاد است چون معاششان کم است و هم افغانی معاش معلمین معاینه کم شده. از این خاطر بسیار زیاد مشکلات معلمین زیاد است. معلمین چون معاششان کم است مجبور مکلف هستند در پهلوی تدریس کارهای دیگر بکنند، مثلا مزدورکاری، در کاری فروشی یا کارهای دیوانی. از این خاطر چون فکر و هوششان طرف یک لغمندانی است که به فامیل خود بیارن تدریس درست کرده نمیتونن و همچنان بعضی سمینارهایی هستند که مجبور هستند که در اون سمینارها برن و درس را که برشان داده میشه بخوانند. اقتصاد معلمین در افغانستان بسیار زیاد خراب است. معاششان در وقت معین یعنی در همون آخر ماهی که باید از وطن داده نمیشه، یک ماه بعد و یا 2 ماه بعد معاش
I think I'm in.
فروش و فکرشان به طرف یک لقمندان حلال است تا به فامیل خود بیارن. چنان من صاحب 3 دختر می باشم که به تشویش زی هستم بسیار زیاد که از درس و تعلیم پس مانده و هیچ کار کرده نمیتونم و درس تعلیمشان که درس تعلیم خود پیش ببره به یک کورس و یا به یک مرجع شاملشان کنم تا درس تعلیم خود پیش ببره.
Hello everyone, hope you're fine and doing well. From one of the students.
The second video is from an Afghan woman teacher inside the country. So I will play it right now.
ما یکی از معلمین مکاتب شهر کابل هستم. مشکلات معلمینی که در مکاتب شهر کابل هست بسیار زیاد می باشد چون معاش به وقتش داده نمیشه. همین چیزی که مرد است در دوران طالبا بیکار است، شوهرایشان بیکار است و این یک معاش خودشان از کل خرج خانه، کرای خانه و دیگه در مکاتب میز چوکینی شاگردات تعدادش زیاد است. در هر صنف 60-70 نفر شاگرد است و معلم نمیتونه به بسیار خوبی شاگردان رسانده و دیگه همچنان مشکلات اقتصادی شاگردان زیاد است به خاطر از این قلم کتابچه ندارن و اکثریت از یا فامیلایشان بیسواد است. در خانه کتشان کار نمیکنه، در مکتب که درس داده میشه خانه که میرن کس دیگه پرسان نمیکنی که چی خواندی چی نخواندی. دیگه به این مشکلات استادا بسیار زیاد مواجه میباشن به خاطر از اینکه درس در مکتب که میره خانه که میره صبحش که میره امور زیاد میگیرن صبحش یادشان میره به خاطر از اینکه دوباره تکرار نمیکنن و مشکلات زیاد که از وقتی که طالبان آمده اقتصاد مردم به طور عموم ضعیف شده که از این جمله که مردات به خاطر از اینکه طالبان کلشون سر قدرت سال چوکی ها را گرفته و مردای شهر کابل کلی در کنجای خانه ششتن دیگه اونمو چند تا معلمینی که در مکاتب درس میده اونمو بیچاره کل خرج خانه در گردن از که به وقت زمانش نمیگیره.
Thank you, Atmas. Thank you for the teachers for sharing their concerns about the situation of educational institutions for girls and everyone in Afghanistan. So the teachers, some people said that some of participants said that the audio wasn't a bit audible. So they expressed their concern about not being paid their salaries on time. Everyone is suffering unemployment. Schools don't have proper equipment for the students. And men are also unemployed because of the corruption that's going on in the country, and Taliban members are being employed more. So these is like I just tried to summarize some of the messages that these teachers mentioned. So now I'd like to invite Richard Bennett to share their opening remarks. Richard, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours. You're on mute, Richard. Richard, you're muted. Could you?
Yeah, okay. I think I'm off off mute now. Thank you very much, Mitra, and also thanks to the organizers, the Gender Persecution Working Group, for this event on specific aspects of the right to education in Afghanistan and in exile for girls and women. The denial of education to girls and women in Afghanistan by the Taliban is notorious and is unique, both in the Muslim world and indeed globally. It's contributed to Afghanistan being labeled, including by me, as the worst country in the world for women. And unfortunately, indeed tragically, there are few, if any, signs that the situation is going to change anytime soon. Each year, the Taliban regime denies even more girls of education when they end their 6th grade studies. And by the end of 2025, it was estimated that 2.2 million girls have been denied education since the Taliban retook power in August 2021. However, it's surprisingly rare to have an event on this important matter with a panel composed of experts in the education field, including several Afghans and my colleague, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, Farida Shahid. These experts will address different questions related to education for Afghan girls and women. For example, states' obligations, the role of neighbors, the implications for peace and security, the role of underground schools, the education of Afghan refugees. I'm looking forward to listening to these experts and learning. For my part, and I'm not an education expert, I just want to briefly mention a couple of things. The right to education is a foundational right and an enabling right. Through education, individuals gain the skills and knowledge to claim all their other rights. This begins from learning to read and write, and therefore to enjoy the right to free expression, learning about a fair and just society, to enjoy the right to political participation, and learning valuable skills that can be used to exercise the right to work and economic empowerment, and importantly, to communicate and receive and impart information via the internet. Depriving women and girls of education denies them of fulfilling their potential intellectually and professionally, which in turn deprives the entire Afghan economy of its productivity and Afghan society of their participation and contributions. The Taliban's denial of education for girls and women therefore impacts all people and all genders in Afghanistan. I want to note that access to and quality of education for boys as well as girls has deteriorated markedly over the past 4 years. In this regard, while madrasa education has long been part of the education landscape in Afghanistan, there are serious concerns about the direction it appears to be taking, and that madrasas may be being used for indoctrination into the extreme ideology of the Taliban. This could have negative consequences socially and economically and for security in Afghanistan and potentially further afield. While many individuals, families, and organizations are doing admirable work to mitigate the impact of the deprivation using innovative, often virtual means, this does not replace formal in-person education at schools, universities for millions of Afghan women and girls. Accountability is a key tool to remedying the denial of education, which forms a core part of the Taliban's commission of persecution on gender grounds against girls, women, and other gender diverse people. This issue has already been investigated by the ICC, and the court's pretrial chamber has issued arrest warrants against 2 Taliban leaders. Furthermore, the UN Human Rights Council established an independent investigative mechanism recently, and this will also be able to investigate alleged crimes and violations related to the right to education and prepare case files for future prosecutions. Several states are alleging violations of CEDAW obligations committed by the state of Afghanistan, including the right to education. This may result in a case before the International Court of Justice, which would contribute to justice for the women and girls of Afghanistan. And lastly, denial of education is part of the systematic persecution and exclusion of Afghan women and girls that is central to discussions about gender apartheid. I'll round up there. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion and contributions of all the esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for noting the importance of accountability for the right to education, and that denial from education is part of the systematic persecution that constitute part of the gender persecution crime against humanity. We haven't, we don't have Farida yet, but I'd like to, are they joining, Artemis?
There is a technical issue. She will be joining in a few minutes. So
Great.
maybe we can start with another panelist. Sorry.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll move to Mariam. Mariam, thank you for joining us today. You are a research fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute. So could you tell us about your recent research that examines the right to education under the Taliban rule and its broader implications for peace in Afghanistan? So maybe you could share your key findings, particularly how the denial of education affects social cohesion, peace, and long-term stability in Afghanistan. And my question has another part as well, and that's based on your research, what policy or advocacy gaps need urgent attention from the international community? Mariam, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Is
Yes,
my
yes, we
voice
can.
here?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me today. And I would like to briefly share some key findings from my research on education under the Taliban. Since the Taliban returns to power in 2021, education in Afghanistan has entered a deep human rights crisis. This is no longer a temporary emergency, especially for women and girls, but a systematic policy of exclusion that is now approaching its 5th year. My research, based on interviews with teachers, parents, students, and education and human rights defenders inside Afghanistan and in exile, shows that the Taliban are using education as a tool of control, not as a public service. Girls are banned from secondary education, leaving families with no real alternative. This denial is deliberate, sustained, and discriminatory. While boys continue to attend school, their education is increasingly restricted and ideological. The curriculum has shifted away from science, civic education, and critical thinking toward religious indoctrination. Teachers reported overcrowded classrooms, underqualified staff, reduced salaries, and increased use of corporal punishment, turning schools into a space of fear rather than learning. You already hear the voice from 2 teachers, which are connected to my findings and was shared through my research, that some of their voices it shows how difficult the situation is for teachers and students and in schools. The findings also shows that the violence in education is not only physical, it's structural through poverty, cultural true narrative that normalize gender inequality, indirect through punishment, intimidation, and humiliation in schools. And in addition, my findings shows a significant link between poverty, particularly the economic situation of teachers and students, and the quality of education. When teachers are struggling economically to prepare adequately and focus effectively on their lectures. Poverty also affects children's participation in schools, as many children drop out to work and support their families, especially in female-headed households where caregivers are no longer able to work. Finally, participants constantly link the collapse of education to broader instability, child labor, early enforced marriages, loss of hope, enforced migration. Afghan students in exile also continue to face discrimination, legal insecurity, and barriers to education, creating continuous cycle of educational exclusion. Uh, I would like to conclude with a brief message to the UN Special Reporters. Which is the denial of education in Afghanistan, particularly for girls, must be recognized as a serious and sustained human rights violation, not a cultural issue or temporary crisis. Education must remain central to all UN engagements with Afghanistan and treated as a non-negotiable right. I urge the United Nations to continue documenting violations, protecting Afghan educators and human rights defenders, and ensuring that Afghan students, both inside the country and in exile, are not abandoned. Without education, there can be no dignity, no equality, no sustainable peace in Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Really great insights that denial of education for girls in Afghanistan must be recognized as a serious human rights issue, violation of human rights, and it's not a cultural issue. That's a kind of misinformation being spread since years. So we have Farida join us, the Special Rapporteur on Education. Hello, Farida. Thank you for joining us. Do you have my voice? Can you hear me?
I'm so sorry. This has been a very difficult connection.
No
Yes,
problem.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. So we had a keynote speech by Richard, and Mariam also discussed the findings of her research into the right to education under the Taliban, as she's a research fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute. So I wanted to ask a question to you, if you're ready. From the perspective of your mandate, what are states' obligations in the face of the Taliban's grave violations of women and girls' right to education, accounting for the broader international community, as well as the role of neighboring countries receiving Afghans fleeing gender persecution? And my question has another part as well. What role can documentation and engagement by Afghan civil society play in supporting your mandate's work to expose rights violations in Afghanistan?
Mitra, so thank you. I'm sorry about the delay. First of all, I just want to salute all the incredibly courageous women in Afghanistan who always defy the Taliban in public at huge risks to themselves. As someone who's defied martial law in my own country, I know what it takes, and that was a much less brutal regime than this is. So salute to all of you who continue the resistance inside and outside Afghanistan. You know, the thing is with the Taliban, it seems that preventing female education is a very particular focus and a particularly perverse objective that they have. You know, from denying children schooling after 6th grade and progressively now to the point where the medical education is not allowed, and you then have treatment can only be done by females. So what this is going to do in the future is going to be a real disaster. The impact is devastating, and since I have assumed my mandate, I have repeatedly expressed my dismay at the gender apartheid and the situation in Afghanistan. So that's something that I've done. I think the excuse that the Taliban, I just heard a little bit of what you were saying before, that they're creating an Islamic curriculum is utter nonsense. There's no visible efforts for this and no timeline. And in the meantime, the officials are going around continuing to enforce their notions of morality, dress codes, and then punishing and incarcerating the transgressors. But there is resistance. So before I come to what can be done, I really want to note that there is some resistance. Some civil society organizations have been working creatively around the rules. They run clandestine operations, although with heightened risks, of course, of what they're doing. But this has enabled some girls and women to study underground schools, in online and in private madrasas, etc. But this is just a drop in the ocean. So the international community, for one thing, I think must find ways to effectively support all those who are providing education, whatever means, within the country, whether it's underground or long distance, etc. And I was looking at UNESCO, for instance, which has supported education for almost 60,000 learners. Most of them are girls, through community-based facilitation. The other thing they're doing, which I think is important, is training and supporting media outlets in Afghanistan, which are running educational programs. And that includes, for instance, the Begum Organization for Women that runs a radio station, a cable network, but also provides a WhatsApp accessible online academy platform, the Solex. And I think that's really important. So I think much more needs to be done. But first of all, this needs to be supported. You need to find ways around the restrictions, and the voices of the Afghan women in all of their diversity, the LGBTQ plus community, must be prioritized and heeded. I don't see enough of that. What should be done and how to go about this, including what should be the terms of engagement with the de facto authorities of the international community. I think people need to be part of that discussion. I do not see enough of that. But those discussions have to be safe so that people can safely express themselves as to what's to be done and not. I do have to say, I think Richard has rightly recommended several times, Richard, the comprehensive action plan to address the human rights crises as a whole, with human rights benchmarks, implementation timelines, and monitoring and reporting entities. However, I think it's important that we remember that while Afghanistan has ratified many UN treaties, human rights treaties, including CEDAW with no reservation whatsoever, the UN is not really a reference point for the de facto authority. So I think the international community really has to exert itself on finding other ways to influence what is going on and to make them uphold some of the rights if it's a difficult situation. I think one major challenge is creating a united approach amongst the international community when states have very different vested interests in Afghanistan, and I think in viewpoints on what should be done. Also, I want to say that when you are trying to exert influence from externally, there is a danger that must be avoided of having negative impact on the people in Afghanistan. So when we're talking about sanctions or other things, I think this is something important. In terms of states who are hosting the Afghans, I think they all have direct obligations under international human rights and refugee laws, including non-refoulement. And the international community must ensure that the neighboring host countries, like my own and Pakistan, uphold their obligations. So in October, I led the communication to the government of Pakistan about the forcible involuntary returns of Afghans from here that denied them protection under the principle of non-refoulement, and the increased risks that this put everyone who's being pushed back in terms of harm and violation of their rights. And we specifically mentioned women and LGBTQI plus community, as well as journalists, ethnic, religious, and marginalized groups, also former officials. And a number of the people who were sent back, reported was before the deadline. And I think those were people, though. There has been a troubling sea change in the attitudes in Pakistan. And I suspect this may be the same in other countries. Unlike the first Taliban takeover, this time civil society attempts to help have been actively and aggressively blocked. So civil society has repeatedly, for instance, opposed the forcible return of the Afghans and its women's organizations, human rights organizations. We've spoken up, people have provided legal and other support to those people, but those who've been helping have been actively pursued and penalized. So there is then a fear. I think it's important that the international community also ensure healthy human rights environment, not just in Afghanistan, but all the host countries, especially the neighboring ones, where this book.
Oh, I think Farida got disconnected and we lost her. We'll come back to her when they're able to join again. Oh yeah, Farida's here. Would you like to, Farida, are you there? I think
Hear me?
I will. Are you there? Yeah. Would you like
Hello?
to wrap up your remarks, Farida? Thank
Bija,
you.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. We've just lost your video, but
I'm going to stop my video because the connection is very weak. Can you hear me?
yes, we can. Yes.
Hello?
Farida, you can't hear us. Can you? I think we're also conscious of time. Oh, Farida, you're back. Okay, great. Maybe we can come back to you, Farida, in a bit, if that's all right. I think we lost Farida. I'll move to Pashtana.
Very sorry. I know you're short
Oh.
of time. Can I
Yeah.
just do 2 or 3 things that I want to say?
Brilliant.
I was
Thank
just saying
you.
there's a troubling change in attitudes. So, and I think that's something that's striking here. I think international cooperation should focus on educational corridors, scholarships, and recognizing the qualifications of Afghan women and others so that they can continue and pursue their education. I think host countries must absolutely ensure non-discriminatory access to schools and universities, regardless of visa status, temporary protection, other things that are going on, whether they have proof for residence. I think you have to separate out and have a firewall between educational services, which must continue, and immigration and other interior ministry kind of things, which must be separated. I think we also have to recognize, however, that the neighboring countries are resource constrained. And so if you're talking about the resource constraints, Afghanistan, of course, bears the brunt here, but the other countries also need to be supported. I think countries in Pakistan, for instance, the countries who have promised visas, have promised exit visas for a lot of Afghans who are stuck there. They need to expedite that. They have been left in limbo here, and it's a very dangerous situation, which opens them to being pushed back into Afghanistan. And in terms of the civil society, I simply cannot overstate the vitality of the information and the insights of civil society for the mandate holders. We depend to such a large extent on your inputs, on people who know, who are there to inform us, because we don't have the resources. And I think it's important also to keeping not just the documentation, but keeping a focus on Afghanistan when there are so many other crises that are happening. I'm sorry, I'm running because I know I'm afraid also of getting cut off at any.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your patience.
No worries. Thank you so much for your remarks, Farida. Really useful, especially the obligation of states under international treaties to uphold the human rights for Afghans. I'll move to Pashtana. Thank you for bearing with us, Pashtana. So Pashtana is leading an organization in Afghanistan that is running underground schools. So based on your work, what are the realities girls and teachers face today in accessing education, and how have risks and restrictions evolved over the past years? And another question is, what forms of international support, financial, political, or protective, are most urgently needed to sustain these efforts?
Thank you so much, Mitra, for that question. And it's good to see Richard and Artemis on the same panel. We've been going in merry-go-rounds in multiple panels, but that's nice. I really appreciate, I think, Richard's intervention. It's highly appreciated. And thank you, Artemis, for putting this panel together, and especially like what Farida had to say, especially like in terms of the exit visas, what is the civil society has to offer, but also in terms of like there has to be an international education corridor that is very different from the interior ministry or whatsoever. I think for me, I have to be very honest, before this call, I was on another call where I was literally telling the AI person on how to teach teachers in Afghanistan on how to do lesson planning or curriculum development. You have to understand that the legal infrastructure in Afghanistan, that is the National Education Strategic Planning, that is basically an adoption of education strategic planning by each country under the SDG Goal 4, has been stopped in 2020. So that hasn't happened in Afghanistan since 2020. So we don't have any plan since then, and it has been 5 years, whereas countries have 5-year plans. They have goals, they have ambition, they train their teachers, they train their students. They meet those goals, and that's how the world tracks the SDG Goal 4 in terms of where we're moving. And sort of understanding how we're closing in that gap of illiteracy. And Afghanistan right now could be a very big case study in terms of like, we are not moving anywhere. We're in a dark hole where we don't understand what our numbers are, what our teachers are doing, where the funding is going, in clear words. Now coming to a basic everyday today structure, I have to tell you that, yes, there are amazing efforts all around Afghanistan, and they're doing amazing things throughout Afghanistan. There are online classes, there are offline classes. I have heard about radios. We work with radios. There are SIM card efforts that are being done. There's Starlink initiatives. The one thing I'm very concerned about throughout is the fact that there's a lack of uniformity. There's a lack of policy and framework towards Afghanistan. And you can see UNESCO, UNICEF, all the big UN agencies funding a lot of great ideas. But the fact that we lack a framework and there is no national strategic education plan to even work off of it. Right now, everybody is doing everything or something, but it's not feeding into a system. And that is concerning. But again, that's not an NGO work. That's not an INGO work. That's what governments do. When governments are in charge, Ministry of Education, they come together. The minister basically is the one who is trying to lead this thing. And we don't have that right now, or at least they are hostile towards half of the country in their education. So you don't necessarily have the same framework. With that being said, good examples for you would be there are a lot of teachers who do a lot of curriculum planning and lesson planning from outdated resources from 2020. There's a lot of hostility towards resources. So for example, right now, the history and geography books in Afghanistan have been deeply changed. The curriculum is deeply challenged, and that's a big issue for us. You can see that the boys that go to school, they're being taught that Mullah Yaqub or the current regime leaders are people who have saved Afghanistan from infidels. If that's the kind of learning that you're going to give to students in grade 10 and 9, I don't know where we're going to end up, apart from the madrasa education that in itself is very concerning. We heard from the teacher who said that there are teachers being appointed within the current regime, but they are Taliban fighters, and that has been true. There was a study or a leak of the news, which was basically 15,000 fighters were appointed as teachers almost 3 years ago, just so because they couldn't find other jobs for them, and they did that. So there's not a lot of accountability in terms of who's getting hired, who's teaching who, why are they getting paid for that. And then apart from that, the most important thing is there's no framework. These are big questions for us to ask as a country where we are moving. And again, like the accountability part of it. Now, coming back to my students, I'm going to give you very small examples of students that have almost traveled 2,000 kilometers just so they can attend a conference on accessing further opportunities for higher education. I have met parents who have been with their daughters and traveled for 2 days just so their daughter could get the training for the part of Samangan where she was teaching, just so she could go back and teach in Samangan. These are the kind of examples you will never hear back from. And I have met students who have been married off to settle down debts and loans, and then they were the ones that we had to buy back. And these are the kids that are the future of Afghanistan. You also have to reflect on one more thing, which is laws right now in Afghanistan don't protect young girls or young kids. That's also something that is very concerning, and we should be reflecting on that too. So for me, the question right now and the reflections that I have is, one is, as a country, where are we moving? We don't have a framework, we don't have a strategic plan, and all these countries are moving into all these different directions, and we are here on this island of, we have banned education for some reason, and there's no framework around it, and there's no negotiation around it. Second, sorry, just to close out with the one thing, which is like, the accountability system is not in place, and one thing could be done is to ensure that the UN systems not only sustain the current efforts, but also put in a framework where accountability and a 5-year long head plan is put in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pashtana. I'm sorry for because we are very conscious of time, and we need to have time for some questions for all of you as well. And thank you for noting the accountability again, and the Taliban need to be held accountable for the gender persecution and for banning the education for girls. So before I move to the next question, I would like to share another message from a female student who has benefited from the services of Learn Afghanistan, an organization that Pashtana is leading. We would need to only play 1 minute of the message because of the time restrictions. Apologies. So let's listen to their message.
Everyone, hope you're fine and doing well. From one of the students from Learn Afghan. I graduated from Learn Afghan School, which has been a very important part of my education. During my studies, we learned 6 subjects, all taught using clear and effective teaching methods. These subjects included English and computer skills as well, which helped me build strong communication and basic digital knowledge. After finishing school, Learn Afghan also supported us through an English academy where we continued improving our English speaking and conversation skills. This program helped students become more confident and better prepared for education and work opportunities. One important strength of Learn Afghan is that it supports capable students beyond education. Students who perform well in their studies are given the opportunities to work with this organization.
Thank you so much. It's such a great initiative. Learn Afghans is one of the initiatives that's going on in Afghanistan. I think there are other initiatives as well, such as online platforms like the Afghan Education Student Outreach Program that I know of, a Begum organization that Farida mentioned, and other initiatives. Well, I mean, more initiatives would be much helpful for students at the moment. However, I mean, all panel speakers also noted and mentioned the restrictions in terms of internet access, the poverty and access to all these services. Just finding out about these initiatives are also some of the challenges. So thank you, Pashtana, again. I'd like to move to Zohra. Zohra, could you please briefly describe your efforts to provide education to Afghan students in Pakistan and the main barriers Afghan refugee girls face in accessing education in Pakistan? Another part of my question is, how have the recent mass deportation of Afghan refugees impacted the students you work with, and what practical steps could host governments, donors, and UN actors need to take to improve access and protection for refugee girls? Zohra, may I ask that you could just limit your remarks to 5 minutes? Thank you. Zohra, are you there? Zohra speaking Farsi.
Yes.
زهره جان هستین؟ صدای ما رو میشنوین؟ خانم زهره اختری. I'm not sure if we have them. زهره صدای ما رو میشنوین؟ Well, in the meantime, until Zora can hear us and can connect, I would ask some of the questions that are put in the chat and in the Q&A section, but I would like to encourage the participants to leave their questions in the Q&A section so we don't miss them, because if you write it in the chat, we might not be able to take all of those questions. Oh yeah, Zora is here. Zora، خانم زهره اختری، صدای ما رو میشنوین؟
سلام. بله، شما صدای من دارین؟
بله بله، بفرمایید.
سلام خانم ها و آقایان محترم و دوستای گرامی. من زهره اختری هستم، یک از فعالان حقوق زن و یک مدافع آموزش. از اینکه به من فرصت دادین تا امروز به نمایندگی از وجدانهای بیدار درباره وضعیت زنان و دختران افغانستان صحبت کنم، سپاسگزارم. امروز 1569 روز، یعنی 4 سال و 3 ماه می شود که دختران سرزمین افغانستان از آموزش محرومند. هر روز که میگذرد مثل 100 سال است برای آنان دخترایی که از حقوق اولیه‌شان باز ماندند. من امروز اینجا صحبت میکنم نه فقط به عنوان یک فعال حقوق بشر، بلکه به عنوان صدای میلیون‌ها زن و دخترانی که صدایشان در افغانستان خاموش شده است. امروز در افغانستان زن بودن جرم است. دختران از حق ابتدایی آموزش محروم هستند. مکتب، پانتون، کار، سفر، حتی نفس کشیدن آزادانه برای زنان و دختران رویات تبدیل شدند. این وضعیت نه یک مسئله فرنگی است، نه یک موضوع داخلی، بلکه نقض آشکار حقوق بشر است. وقتی دختران فقط به خاطر جنسیتشان اجازه رفتن به مکتب را ندارند، آنجا دیگر صحبت از سیاست نیست، بلکه صحبت از انسانیت است. سالها است که برای آموزش زنان و دختران افغانستانی تلاش میکنم. وقتی طالبان در 2021 به قدرت رسید، در خیابان‌ها اعتراض کردم، دستگیر شدم و به خشونت روبرو شدم. اما سکوت نکردم. هر مهاجری که در پاکستان میآیند و فکر میکنند که در اینجا جانشان امن است و اطفالشان بر خصوص دخترانشان میتوانند به تحصیلات خود ادامه دهند، مگر چنین نیست؟ خودم در سال 2022 مجبور شدم به پاکستان مهاجر شوم و در آنجا به ایجاد یک کمپ برای مهاجرین من و دخترم شروع به تدریس کودکان کردیم. بعد از ساختن یک فضای امن یادگیری ایجاد کردیم و بعد از مدت به همکاری یک تیم این کار را ادامه دادیم. اما پس از 1 سال پلیس پاکستان ما را به زور از این کمپ بیرون کرد. 10 بار مجبور شدیم به تغییر خانه و جای خود و دیگر خانه برای تدریس برای اطفال جای امن نبود. آخر کار در پارک ها تدریس کردیم. بعد از مدت دیگر پارک و خانه هم نشد برای ما و ایجاد به درس های آنلاین شروع کردیم. اما اکنون بیشتر از کودکان به اخراج اجباری به افغانستان برگشتند، جایی که نه به اینترنت و نه به برق و دیگر وسایل دسترسی دارند. و بعضی از کودکانی که همراه ما بودند در مناطق مختلف پاکستان رفتند. در پاکستان فعلا دختران و اطفال و تمام مهاجرین مانند یک زندانی زندگی میکنند. دختران پناهنده به مانع بزرگ روبرو هستند. اخراج اجباری، فقر شدید، نبود اسناد اقامتی، تبعیض در مدارس، نگرانی های امنیتی و ازدواج زودهنگام. اخراج های دستجمعی آخر ضربه جدی وارد کرده. دانش آموزایی که تلاش میکردند که در درس و تحصیل خود را ادامه بدن همش را از نو گرفتن و به بازگشت اجباری مواجه شدند. من از دولت‌های میزبان، کمک کننده‌های مالی و نهادهای سازمان ملل می‌خواهم سازمان ملل متحد فشار بیارد بر کشور میزبان برای ارائه ویزا و کارت اقامتی برای پناهندگان، تضمین دسترسی بدون تبعیض دختران پناهنده به آموزش، سرمایه گذاری هدفمند در آموزش دختران و استخدام معلمان زن، حمایت مالی مستقیم از خانواده‌ها تا از فقر منع آموزش نشود و اونا بتانند به خدمات اینترنتی و درس خود ادامه بدن. ایجاد فضای آموزشی، امن و ارائه خدمات روانی و اجتماعی، فشار دیپلماتیک و تحریم‌های هدفمند علیه طالبان، جلوگیری از عدمسازی محرومیت آموزشی دختران. اگر فرصت برایم ارائه شود، من میتوانم که در پاکستان برای پناهندگان در بخش آموزش خدمت کنم. سکوت برای این ظلم همدستی با و در آخر میبخشین دختران پناهنده نه یک لطف است، نه یک گزینه. گزینه اختیاری، یک حق انسانی و یک ضرورت جهانی است. افغانستان بدون زن آزاد افغانستان نیست. آینده ای که در آن زنان نباشد آینده نیست. سرمایه گذاری در آموزش، این دختران سرمایه گذاری در ثبات، امنیت و آینده مشترک ماست. بیایید در کنار هم بیستیم برای آموزش، برای آزادی، برای کرامت انسانی و برای حق زندگی با عزت برای زنان و دختران افغانستان. از شما میخواهم که صدای این دختران باشید. آنها شایسته بهترین هستند. تشکر از توجه شما.
بسیار تشکر خانم زهره اختری. واقعا افغانستان بدون زنان آزاد افغانستان آزاد نیست. Thank you so much, Zora Akhtari, the teacher in Pakistan and advocate for refugee girls in Pakistan. As we have only some 20 minutes left, I'd like to ask questions that are in the Q&A section of this webinar. I think I'll start with the first question from someone who's from Palestine. They've asked, can women and girls practice and revive this approach today in order to reduce the level of illiteracy among women and girls? They have mentioned an approach in Palestine that created a new concept known as popular education, where learning took place in homes. And may I ask maybe one panelist to take each question? And there are some questions addressed specifically to Richard and some questions, I think, to Pashtana. So maybe if this is relevant to any panelist, they can take. And can you please also like keep your remarks like max 2 minutes, or one minute would be great. Would like to answer this question? I think Pashtana would be relevant to you because you have home
I was just waiting if somebody else has to say something. But yeah, I think the one thing we have to understand is like it's also not the first time, as you said, Mitra, that you have been someone who has gone through this and you're still here and, you know, have been educated and like, you know, are showing up for things. I have family members going through the same thing. So just to make sure that this is a second wave of a ban on Afghanistan. So Afghanistan has learned from the first wave of the ban. There's a lot of ways that we have now excelled. And also just keep in mind that as we highlight the problems, Afghanistan is also the one of the countries that has the highest technological educational developments happening in the past 4 years. That puts us on the top when it comes to post-conflict countries with our strategic solutions, frameworks, and stuff like that. So basically what we are working on right now could be replicated in Yemen, Syria, Sudan, and Somalia as their current conflict or post-conflict countries. So there are ways where we have even studied Kenyan education approaches and even like Nigerian education approaches, Sierra Leone approaches, and even Palestine to some extent, I would say. So definitely this could be replicated and has been replicated in the past too, just in a very different way where the approach definitely has been, yes, homeschooling, sure, but not popular education, more like what would be useful in that context, what would be needed for you to get out, access to opportunity and stuff like that. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Pashtana. There is a question to Richard. It was in the chat. If the inclusion of girls' education costs the recognition of the regime, are the UN and their ally countries ready to recognize and pave the ground for such an opportunity? Richard.
I'm not sure I understand that question very well. About paving the ground to create an opportunity. What I might not be understanding the question, but what I am taking from the question is: are there incentives as well as I talked about accountability, and the other side of that might be incentives, and is that what is being asked? What are the Taliban being asked to do if they are to get recognition. Now, I'm going to refer this to, I know it's not popular, not even very popular with me, the Doha process. Because I think what is missing there is a kind of human rights roadmap. That is, we do know that, of course, Afghanistan ought to meet all its obligations under the international, the human rights conventions that it's ratified. But it's unlikely to do that. So what is the core, what is the threshold that needs to be achieved? Is it just opening schools? Would that lead the way to recognition? In my view, that's too simple an answer, because I can see a question there from Lucia with us, where she is kind of asking, yes, well, if the schools were opened, what else needs to be done? Is it enough to open schools? What if the schools are open to girls and then it's ideological education? Or only religious education, not a comprehensive education. So I think what is needed is a kind of human rights framework, and Pashtana was using the word framework, I think in a different sense, but that can be a roadmap. So in response to the question, there ought to be a roadmap, but we are not there yet. And I think it's important for civil society to set out what it needs in a roadmap. And I just want to say one more thing, because I think Pashtana wants to contribute as well. This is not a response to the questions, a bit of a wrap-up comment, but I may not get any other time. In this meeting, who are we talking to? I can see a lot of Afghans here. And it's great that you are here. I see educators, especially women educators. It's great that you are here. International education experts. Are there any member states here? Are those people that can bring to bear the leverage of the international community and have policies themselves? Are they listening to this conversation? I don't know. I see 75 people listening, but how many are representing governments? And my offer is, I can't do much in this space, but my offer is, if you organizers want me to help you take the voices in this seminar to member states, I will stand with you and support you to do that. I will try to open doors and get them to listen to this really rich discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Pashtana, would you like to go ahead and answer the questions that are addressed to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Richard, for that, and definitely needed a much needed space where people are not listening to us anyway. So thank you for offering that space. I want to answer all of the questions all at once, if that's okay, Mitra, and I'm going to stay under 3 minutes, I promise. I think Abdurrahim Wardak said, if I don't have access to the media, the plan that was shared on the media or the strategic plan, we have to be understanding of the two things. There's an education strategic plan, and then there's the Taliban regime plan. The Taliban regime plan has been very famous, has been going on around, and people have been commenting on it. I'm talking mainly about the education strategic plan, that the Taliban don't have it. You can go to the Ministry of Education, you can try and find it. There's not a strategic plan from 2021 to 2025 or from 2025 going onwards or between those spaces for men and women, young girls and boys. So I think that's something we need to be very mindful of when we are trying to discuss it. I do see a lot of young girls trying to ask for GED, HEC and stuff like that. I think it would be really great if you could all access Learn resources on our website. You can definitely find a LearnMate, that is an AI generated space where you can find your lesson plans, curriculums, and stuff like that. And it's free of cost, so you don't need to do anything, and you can do it as a guest. You can also access free synchronous and asynchronous classes. I also want to mention one last thing, which is, if you're from provinces, teachers, educators from within Afghanistan, from places like Badghis, Farah, Jawzjan, Kapisa, Khost, Kunduz, Laghman, Logar, Nimruz, Nuristan, Paktia, Paktika, Panjshir, Saripul, Uruzgan, and Wardag. I would really like to welcome any one of you to apply for our CPEC classes or community-based education programs, where you're only supposed to send us a 2-pager community-verified space proposal. And if the community is okay with you teaching, we're going to support you financially, training-wise, and everything-wise. So I think if you're an expert who needs resources right now for your community to teach, and if you're a teacher, we're more than happy to give you those resources. And if you're someone who's from other spaces, I think somebody from Bamiyan commented that we have an organization, we're working here, but we don't have a main framework to feed into. We're doing it 34 provinces wide. We welcome anyone to collaborate with us. So you're more than welcome to come in and pitch your idea, and we're happy to support it. We do have schools and classes in Bamiyan, so happy to feed into that space. But all in all, my suggestion definitely is, yes, we are working on a national framework. You're more than welcome as a teacher in Afghanistan to ask us for resources and trainings, and we're going to help you with that. And the same applies to students and students who might be in exile in Pakistan, Iran, or anywhere else and want to access resources. You're more than welcome to do the same thing. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Pashtana. I think I'll go to other questions one by one. There is a question about, is it important for us to urge governments to label gender apartheid in Afghanistan? I think Richard or Farida, would you like to answer that? And I assume this has been not already addressed in some of the remarks here, but again, very briefly.
Very briefly, and I would also, as Richard has offered, that if there's any way that we can help bring the voices, my mandate, of course, is not Afghanistan as a whole, it's education. But I think you will find many mandate holders who are also happy to work with you. I think that idea of gender apartheid being considered and labeled as a crime against humanity is something which is being discussed. And I see no reason why not, because if you have this situation where it's so extreme that women have and girls have no right and there is active persecution, I think that's something that needs to be thought about. But it may be something that is more useful in terms of the conversations it generates rather than in the end product of what you may have. So I would say that the process may be more interesting and valuable than the end product of having something which says this is a crime against you.
Thanks, Farida. Richard, I think I would ask the next question from you from the Q&A. There's a question, how can the UN country team work in a more centralized way to engage civil society to highlight their work and knowledge and advocate with the international community?
Sure. I mean, just to say, I agree with Farida on gender apartheid. Maybe the process is as or more important than the end product. And we should, in my view, keep using this term. Because Afghanistan is not number one priority in the international community. And we need to draw attention to the extreme situation for women and girls, particularly. On the question of the UN country team, I don't know whether we're talking here about two country teams. There's one in Afghanistan and one in Pakistan. Maybe they both should be more engaged with civil society. I believe there is a bit of a tendency not to, I think that UN country teams don't reach out sufficiently to civil society. And I think they need to do a lot more. And I think it's not only UN country teams. I think it's their colleagues at the headquarters, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which both Farida and I engage with. We're not part of that, but we are supported by that office. And I think prioritizing civil society and prioritizing civil society also in the intergovernmental processes as well as country teams, whether it's Human Rights Council or CSW or General Assembly, Security Council, that all needs to be done. Civil society, and Farida put it well earlier, it's the foundation for pretty much everything that we do. So I think probably that's all I wanted to. I did have something else that came into my mind, and now I can't remember exactly what it is. But I think this has been a good example of the voices of Afghan women being played and speaking. And I go back again to what we can do as special procedures mandate holders is help to amplify those voices and to bring your voices as much as possible directly to those who form policies at domestic and international level.
Thank you, Richard. There's another question from you, and it's in Farsi. They say they've asked, what is the solution if the online education does not work as well, because schools and international universities do not approve the documents of online institutions? What would be the issue here? Like, because online education wouldn't also be helpful in some situations.
So if I can, sorry, I will
Please
try
go
and
ahead,
put my
Hilda.
video on for what it's worth. We have been trying very hard and working with UNESCO to get them to have equivalencies and to accept that there are many different forms. And that I think UNESCO is starting to work on that. You have that issue with refugees, you have it with displaced people whose credentials are not accepted. So I think we need to have a discussion with UNESCO as well as with the states there to say that this is absolutely essential given how many crises we have, how many areas of conflict we have. The differences in terms of education is something that UNESCO has taken up in the past, and we continue to engage with them on the necessity of having things which are equivalencies so that whether it's online or offline, there has to be some standards, some means of bringing it together and accepting that this is education.
Great. Pashtana, thank you, Farida. Pashtana, please go ahead.
Just adding to that, I also feel like it's very important for the nonprofits and NGOs, wherever you're getting your education, for them to keep your records. It's very important. I feel like at the end of the day, this is going to be recognized in some way and form. And from what we are understanding, for the past 4 or 5 years, we have been keeping all the data for all our students. And now the learning passport is becoming like a main thing, which was UN mandated back in the day too. So I feel like it's very important that we talk about learning passports. We talk about the mainstream sort of approaches and as the learning standards that are being developed by UNESCO. But in the meantime, as nonprofit leaders, as educators, as Afghans, as teachers, it's important for us to keep the data, keep the records, ensure that all students and data is able to be transferable, and students and teachers meet those data, those standards when they're giving those diplomas. So we have to have that in the back of our minds for any expert and teacher. Yeah.
Just a question from me, sorry. Because there are a few initiatives going on, how can we ensure the kind of collaboration between all of them so they all, are abiding by the same standards and that you just mentioned?
I think the good rule of thumb is there is a big consortium on Afghanistan right now, which is was led by the American University of Afghanistan at some point, and it has all kinds of organizations. So I think just go to their website, and I was part of the working group where they developed the standards for schools, what your curriculum should have for you to meet that certain standard of what a grade 12 student should look like. So you definitely follow that. But apart from that, also UNESCO definitely has those standards. Whenever you're working with them on a project, they have those standards and you have to meet them. Last but not the least, if you're a small organization or a small community-based teacher, reach out to bigger organization, ask them for resources, help, curriculum, lesson plans, and stuff like that. That's the only way to move forward, is asking and seeking help and support. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pashtana. There are lots of questions, and I apologize if I cannot take all of them and I cannot mention because we are really running out of time. And there are lots of comments. I would encourage all panel members and participants to read those messages from students who are all saying that they're in limbo. They they're all expressing their concern and how distressed they are because of being banned from pursuing education. There is one question here from someone about, are international organizations willing to pay concrete political or economic cost to defend the right to education in Afghanistan? And then I would take another one that's kind of relevant is, why have sanctions and international pressure not been explicitly conditioned on girls' right to education? Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I know we're running out of time, so I just want to say two things, one of which is positive, I hope, and one of which is a little bit worrying. On the positive side, I really value the contribution of the students who have spoken today. And last year, I think the most inspiring thing I did was I taught a course at American University of Afghanistan, and I was also a guest lecturer in three other times with Afghan students. And it was totally inspiring to me to work with young Afghans. So I just want to say that. And that's what I think should motivate all of us, that potential of youth. The thing that I'm going to say, which is not so positive, I'm afraid, but I'm kind of realistic, and it responds to some of these other questions about, why the international community not doing more? Why? And I keep hearing from different governments, including in a discussion I had with a government today, that pretty much Afghanistan is no longer regarded as a priority. If you're reading the news, you can see the other countries that are regarded as priorities. And the only thing that many constituents care about, not just governments, because they're answerable in democracies to their voters, one is immigration and the other is terrorism. And that, unfortunately, it's really difficult to gain the serious attention of many governments unless it's one of those things. And I'm certainly not, advocating for this, but I do think it's realistic. We need to find creative ways to show that it is governments operate from their self-interest. They don't operate compassionately. I'm sorry, I'm being very cynical about this, but they tend to operate from their self-interest. So I think what we need to do, or what you need to do with us in support, is to frame concerns in the self-interest of governments, whether it's governments in the region or governments further afield. Show them that supporting education, in this case, and supporting many other human rights, is in their self-interest, not only in the self-interest of Afghans, which of course it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Good news that we can go another 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. So there's a question about, from a doctoral researcher to you and Farida, to Richard and Farida, how is the international community thinking about adapting AI to support women who can stay online but lack peers and mentors? And then there's another question, how can we ensure AI-enabled learning leads to recognized outcomes such as accredited credentials or pathways into further education and employment?
I think this is for Farida.
Okay, so I have actually written an entire report on AI in education, and I would encourage people to read that who have. So this is, I think AI is complicated, and my problem is not that there is internet, etc. There is also a serious issue of what is called standardization. There's an issue of taking over the values and of companies increasingly determining what is education, what's to be taught, and how we're to assess it. I think it's something that needs a lot more thought and careful consideration. AI has some wonderful advantages, and I've mentioned those also, and it has helped persons with disabilities. It's quite amazing what it can do. But on the other hand, I think there's a serious issue of distorting this. And you have companies I'm not talking Afghanistan, I'm talking UK, where they're bringing in digital means and the AI and saying, we are now the educators. So the companies, the private companies, are giving you this technology, but insisting that they will now become the managers of education. I think that's an extremely dangerous way to go down. But I do think we need to have more conversations on how this can be helpful. Clearly, in situations like Afghanistan and Palestine and other places, the internet connection is essential. You need to continue with that communication somehow, but it needs to be done in ways that is led by people on the ground. I would say people know their own situation much better than companies sitting somewhere. So you need to have that marriage. I'm happy to be part of further discussions on this, but it's a rather complex situation. Aship Ashtana also wants to say something.
Thank you, Farida, for that. Thank you so much for saying that it's the people have to lead it, because we have been trying to create our own AI. And if you go to LearnS's website, you'll find a LearnMate, which was trained on all LearnS's curriculum and Afghanistan's curriculum. So it's basically contextualized. You can go and ask a grade 8 question, and it's going to respond in a grade 8 question for Pashto and Dari from the books that you have read and you're studying. So very contextualized. I definitely think that there's a lot to be discussed and figured out. One thing I definitely am excited about is AI definitely could transition in a space within Afghanistan where we could become an AI industry, especially for the girls that are being educated in this space. You don't necessarily have to transition into other spaces. You could definitely transition into AI. The one thing we are doing right now is basically every grade 12 graduate is transitioning into AI learning, data science, and stuff like that. That definitely is something that we have been experimenting with, and we have a pipeline of the first 20 advocates for mental health space learning. So all in all, to say that definitely contextualized has to be kept in mind that internet is a big issue for us. That's why a low bandwidth AI is the biggest thing that we are thinking of right now. Last but not the least, it could be a very good alternative to the embroidery and the pickle making projects that we have been having in Afghanistan. No hate on those, but I definitely think now is the time that Afghan girls graduating from grade 12 have jobs with dignity and earn a proper livable wage. And I do think that we could do that with AI and the space that we are working with right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a question to Bastana, if you allow me 1 second. If you would connect with me at some point on how effective the net is in Afghanistan and how many people have access to it.
Sure.
Because the gender digital divide is huge, especially in South Asia. I mean, in Pakistan, it's one of the highest. So at some point different from here, we can discuss that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, big time. I definitely agree that the internet and digital divide is very big. The one thing we have been tackling with right now is we have antennas that basically have internet, very fast internet, and they are going to be expanded to all the 34 provinces where we have centers and spaces for in-space learning and even online learning. So I cannot take the name of the antenna, but I think you all will recognize what antenna I'm talking about. So that's something that is not traceable by the current regime and can be accessed and has been used by the students and the teachers in the past. And that's how we navigated the internet blackout. The second thing would be the digital divide. We use a lot of refurbished devices for all students and teachers. So whatever refurbished we could find all over the world, we ship them to Afghanistan and use them. And that's a good way of recycling and upcycling the current devices, sort of, with the ecosystem and environment. And then with the internet, we just use the antenna so that it's not traceable. And we hope to make it as accessible as possible. But I do agree that Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, including, are very hostile spaces for something like this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Pashana and Farida. I'd like to go to another question. There is a question I will skip the first part of that because they said, what is the situation of adolescent girls in terms of their education currently? Well, I think it's an issue we have been discussing this in this webinar, but yeah, briefly, anyone would like to go ahead and address this?
Anyone? I mean, briefly, the one thing I could say is grade 1 to grade 6, sure, there are schools, but you have to understand that Afghanistan was in conflict for 20 years while that was happening. So all these schools and all this progress is still limited to cities. It's not necessarily everywhere in Afghanistan. Rural young adolescent girls still don't have access to grade 1 to grade 6 learning. It's pretty much city and urban spaces that have access to that. And even with that, I feel like it's pretty much discouraged, because beyond grade 6, what are you going to do if you can't pursue it beyond grade 6? So that definitely is a big mark. And last but not the least, nutritional problems are coming up again and again. Mental health issues are coming up and again. Afghanistan right now is the highest female suicide country that has the highest female suicide rate. Mental health issues are the highest in Afghanistan, and that definitely affects the young kids. We run clinics within Afghanistan, and the one thing we have been seeing again and again is like the young girls that come in with mothers and to seek help, prenatal, postnatal, the kids that are either malnourished, undernourished, or are struggling with some sort of mental health crisis. So all those are basically the crisis right now in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Another follow-up question to you, Pashtana, about students graduating from Learn Afghan School. Can they apply for scholarship by this online school certificate? I think you've addressed this already, but again, if you could confirm.
Yes, they can. We keep all their data. There is a QR code. They can apply for any kind of scholarships. We are greatly supported. UWC has had some applications from our students. Canada had some applications from our students. We also are applying for GED right now, so that there is like a uniform policy for anyone who's getting that. But we're also hoping that UNESCO or UN could come through and just give us the standardized required that we meet, so that we don't have to spend so much money on the GED. But yes, you can apply for scholarships. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really apologize if we are not able to take all these questions, because we are running out of time, and it's getting darker here as well in this part of the world. But I'd like to thank everyone, to our speakers, to all of you for joining us today from across the world as we discussed the right to education for Afghans, the implications of the violation of this right on students' mental health, the economy and future of a generation, the reality for girls and teachers, as we heard the messages today, the risks associated with underground education, the impact of deportation of Afghan refugee students in Pakistan, the advocacy around the right to education, and the need to take practical and meaningful steps by the international community, holding the Taliban into account for violating the very basic right to education, and all the international community's efforts and the need for these efforts to ensure the right to education for Afghan women and girls are met. And again, it's been an honor to have you with us today, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much again. Have a lovely day and evening.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, Mitra.
Thank you, everyone.
colleague.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's
Thank
been an
you.
honor to me.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Honor for me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.